Hello, everyone. My name is Naomi, and for most of my 42 years, I lived my life as a ghost in my own family. It's a strange thing to be present in a room but to feel entirely invisible, to have your voice absorbed by the walls before it can ever reach the ears of the people you love most. They had a story they liked to tell about me, a convenient label that explained me away. I was Naomi, the overly sensitive writer, the dreamer, the one who felt too much and accomplished too little. My brother, Ethan, was the star of their story. He was the charming businessman, the prodigal son, the one who knew how to work a room and turn a phrase into a promise, even if that promise was built on a foundation of sand. The story my family told about us was as neat and tidy as it was false, and it was a story I almost started to believe myself. But everything changed on the day of my father's memorial service, the day I stood up to give his eulogy and ended up delivering the truth instead, a truth he had left for me to find. Before I dive into the story of how a box of hidden letters exposed a lifetime of lies and changed my world forever, I'd love to know where you're all watching from today. Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you've ever felt underestimated or unheard by the people who are supposed to believe in you most, hit that like button so I know I'm not alone. For all the new faces here, make sure you subscribe to join our community of storytellers and survivors. This is a journey you won't want to miss. The dynamic was set so early, it felt less like a pattern of behavior and more like a law of nature in our household. I was the quiet rain, and my brother, Ethan, was the thunder. Our home operated on a simple principle. Ethan's needs, his ambitions, his very presence were loud, demanding, and important. Mine were whispers, easily ignored. I remember my 8th birthday party with a clarity that still stings. I had asked for one thing: a complete set of colored pencils, the fancy kind with 72 different shades, nestled in a tin box. I dreamed of the worlds I could draw with them. My parents, Dad in particular, had smiled and promised. The day came, and I unwrapped the box with trembling hands. It was perfect. For about 10 minutes, I was the center of attention, the birthday girl. Then Ethan, who was 10, unveiled his gift to me. It wasn't a toy or a book. It was a framed certificate, printed on our home computer, announcing that he had officially named a star after me through some dubious online registry he'd spent his allowance on. He made a grand speech about how I was his star, how I would shine forever in the heavens. My mother, Eleanor, wept with pride. Our aunts and uncles applauded his thoughtfulness, his incredible maturity. My 72 perfect pencils were forgotten on the table. All anyone could talk about was Ethan's grand gesture. "What a heart that boy has," my Aunt Carol cooed, patting his head. "So generous, thinking of his little sister like that." I remember looking from the certificate to my pencils and feeling a confusing sense of shame, as if my simple, tangible dream was somehow less worthy than his performative, intangible one. He hadn't given me a star. He had bought himself a moment of applause using my birthday as the stage. Even at 8, I understood that. But no one else seemed to. This theme played out on a loop through our childhoods. When I won the regional spelling bee in middle school, my father, Arthur, gave me a proud, if somewhat distracted, hug. That same evening, Ethan, who had struck out 3 times in his baseball game, spent the entire dinner recreating his almost home run, complete with sound effects and dramatic lunges. My mother hung on his every word. "The competitive spirit on that one," she'd say, her eyes shining. "He just never gives up." My trophy, sitting on the mantelpiece, seemed to shrink with every word. My father would sometimes catch my eye, a flicker of something apology in his gaze, but he would never challenge the narrative. He was a man who craved peace above all else, and in our house, peace was purchased with silence and the tacit agreement that Ethan was the sun around which we all orbited. Dad was a quiet man, an accountant by trade, but a historian by passion. His study was a sanctuary, a room filled with the scent of old paper, leather-bound books, and pipe tobacco. He loved stories of the past, of empires risen and fallen, of quiet scholars who changed the world with a pen. I thought, naively, that he would understand my own desire to create worlds with words. When it came time for college, my path seemed clear to me. I wanted to study literature, to become a writer. The day I told my parents, the air in the living room grew thick with disappointment. My mother was the first to speak. A writer? Naomi, be serious. What kind of a living is that? It's a hobby, dear, not a career. Ethan, home for the weekend from his business program, smirked from his armchair. Let her have her fantasy, Mom. Someone has to write the sad poems no one reads. My father just sighed, cleaning his glasses with a handkerchief. Your mother has a point, Naomi. It's an unstable path. Have you considered something more practical? His words, so reasonable on the surface, were the cruelest cut of all. The one person I thought would understand, the man who lived and breathed stories, was dismissing mine before it had even begun. I went anyway, paying my way with scholarships and part-time jobs, determined to prove them wrong. Meanwhile, Ethan's path was paved with gold. He was studying business, a choice my parents lauded as brilliant and forward-thinking. They co-signed loans for his first car and gave him a generous allowance. When he pitched a ludicrous idea for an app that would supposedly match people's socks, they invested $5,000 without blinking. You have to support ambition, my mother would declare to anyone who would listen. Ethan is going to be a millionaire before he's 30. The sock matching app, of course, went nowhere, but the failure was never mentioned. It was just a learning experience on his journey to success. My own small successes were met with a resounding silence. In my junior year of college, I won a prestigious university prize for a short story. It came with a $500 award and a publication in a respected literary journal. I called home, my voice buzzing with excitement. My mother answered. "Oh, that's nice, dear," she said, her tone flat. "Listen, I have to run. Ethan is on the other line. His team just won their case competition. They're flying to the Nationals in Chicago. Your father is so proud, he's practically bursting." Click. The line went dead. I stood in my dorm room, the award letter in my hand feeling like a piece of worthless paper. It wasn't just that they didn't care, it was that my achievements were an inconvenience, a distraction from the main event, the glorious life and times of Ethan. My father did send me a check for $100 a week later. The memo line was blank. There was no note. It felt like a guilty, silent transaction, a way of assuaging his conscience without ever having to say the words, "I see you. I'm proud of you." I cashed it and felt nothing but a hollow ache. The only person who seemed to exist outside of my family's gravitational pull was my friend, Clara. We had met in a poetry workshop, both of us hunched over our notebooks, trying to wrestle life into stanzas. Clara was fierce, funny, and had a built-in detector for nonsense that was second to none. She was the one I called after the phone call with my mother. I recounted the conversation, my voice thick with unshed tears. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Naomi, they're not a mirror. They're a funhouse mirror. They don't reflect what's real. They reflect their own distorted ideas back at themselves. What they see when they look at you has nothing to do with you, and everything to do with the role they need you to play in their weird little family drama." I remember sitting on my bed, the phone pressed to my ear. "But why?" I whispered. "Why do they need me to be the failure?" "Because," Clara said gently, "it makes Ethan's brand of success look shinier. In a story, you need a hero, and you need a sidekick. They just cast the roles wrong." Her words were a lifeline. She saw my writing not as a silly hobby, but as a craft. She read my drafts, circled my best lines, and pushed me to submit to more journals. "This is good, Naomi," she'd say, tapping a page. "This is real. Don't you ever let them convince you it's not." As the years passed, the chasm between my brother and me widened. I graduated, moved to a small apartment in the city, and pieced together a life as a freelance writer and editor. It wasn't glamorous. Some months were terrifyingly lean, a landscape of instant noodles and carefully calculated bus fares. But it was a life I was building myself, with my own hands, word by word. I published more stories, a handful of poems, and slowly built a reputation for being a meticulous and empathetic editor. Ethan, on the other hand, was a supernova of perceived success. He launched a series of consulting firms, each with a slick website and a vague mission statement. He drove a luxury car, wore tailored suits, and spoke of leveraged assets and synergistic growth models. My parents were ecstatic. They saw the symbols of success and never bothered to look at the substance. They never questioned where the money came from or where it went when one of his ventures inevitably collapsed, only to be replaced by another, even grander one. The last few years of my father's life were difficult. His health began to fail, a slow, cruel decline that stole his mobility and clouded his sharp mind. Ethan immediately stepped into the role of a devoted son. He moved back to our hometown, ostensibly to manage Dad's affairs. In reality, he managed access to our father. Whenever I would drive the 2 hours to visit, Ethan would be there, acting as a gatekeeper. "Dad's resting," he'd say, blocking the doorway to the study. "You'll just tire him out, Naomi. He gets agitated by too much emotional intensity." He framed my quiet presence, my desire to simply sit and read with my father as we used to, as a source of stress. He, on the other hand, would burst into the room with loud, cheerful updates about his latest business deal, waving papers that Dad couldn't possibly read. "Just need your signature here, Dad," he'd boom. "Just a formality for the portfolio." I watched, helpless, as my father, diminished and weary, would scrawl his name where Ethan pointed. A knot of deep unease tightened in my stomach. Something was wrong. I could feel it, a cold dread that went beyond my father's illness. But when I tried to voice my concerns to my mother, she dismissed them instantly. "Ethan is a blessing," she said, her voice sharp. "He's handling everything so we don't have to. You should be grateful, Naomi, not suspicious. It's that writer's imagination of yours, always inventing drama where there is none." She made me feel small and paranoid, and once again, I retreated into silence. The end came on a cold Tuesday in October. We were all at the hospital. Ethan was holding Dad's one hand, my mother holding the other. He was the one speaking to the doctors, his voice full of authority and feigned medical knowledge. I stood at the foot of the bed, a ghost in the room, watching my father's life flicker and fade. When his breathing finally stilled, my mother let out a wrenching sob and collapsed into Ethan's arms. He held her, his face a perfect mask of tragic grief, his eyes steely and dry as he looked over her head, straight at me. In that moment, he wasn't my brother. He was a victor. My own grief was a silent, crushing weight, a private sorrow in a room full of performative mourning. The family, our aunts, uncles, and cousins, all rallied around Ethan and my mother. He was the man of the family now, the strong one holding everyone together. I was just the sensitive daughter, too fragile to be of any use. They'd pat my arm with pitying looks. "Take care of yourself, dear," they'd murmur, before turning back to praise Ethan for his incredible strength. I had never felt more alone. A week later, Ethan called for a family meeting. He didn't want to wait for the official reading of the will with the lawyer. He wanted to share Dad's final wishes with me and my mother in the privacy of the family home. We sat in the living room, the same room where my literary ambitions had been dismissed years ago. The air was heavy and formal. My mother sat on the sofa, her hands twisted in her lap, looking at Ethan with complete, trusting adoration. He stood by the fireplace, a leather-bound folder in his hand. He cleared his throat. "I had a long talk with Dad a few months ago," he began, his voice imbued with a somber gravity. He knew he was fading, and he wanted to make sure everything was in order. He made me the sole executor of his estate. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. He was very clear about his intentions. "He has left the house, the savings, and the entire investment portfolio to me." My mother nodded, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. I felt a cold shock, a numbness spreading through my limbs. It couldn't be true. My father, for all his passivity, loved me. He couldn't just erase me. I opened my mouth to protest, but Ethan held up a hand, silencing me. "He did make a provision for you, Naomi," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "He set aside a small trust of $20,000. For your hobbies," as he put it. The cruelty of that word was a physical blow. It was their word, not his. "But more importantly," Ethan continued, his eyes locking onto mine, "he told me why. He said, and this is a direct quote, 'I am so disappointed in Naomi's choices. She's a dreamer, and dreamers can't be trusted with responsibility. I need you, Ethan, to be the rock. You're the only one I can count on.'" The lie was so audacious, so perfectly crafted to inflict the maximum amount of pain, that I couldn't even breathe. He was using our dead father's voice to deliver the final, crushing verdict on my life. My mother started to cry softly. "Oh, Arthur," she whispered. He was always so worried about her. She looked at me not with sympathy, but with a kind of resigned pity, as if my father's disappointment was a truth she had known all along. I felt the floor drop out from beneath me. This was it. This was the story they would tell forever. Arthur's final word was that I, his daughter, was a failure. Ethan was the chosen one, and I had no way to fight it. I don't believe you," I stammered, my voice a broken whisper. Ethan's expression hardened. "Believe what you want," he said coldly. "The legal documents will confirm everything. In the meantime, I'm going to need you to clear out your old things from the house."
"And Dad's study."
"I need the space for a home office. I'll give you 2 weeks." He dismissed me with a wave of his hand, turning his attention to comforting our mother, who was now weeping into his shoulder. I was erased, not just from the will, but from my father's love, from his respect, from our entire family history. It was the most profound and painful invisibility I had ever known. The 2 weeks that followed were a blur of grief and humiliation. Ethan gave me a set of boxes and a deadline. The task of clearing out my father's study felt like a punishment, a final chore to prove my lowly status. Each day, I would drive to the house, now feeling like a stranger in it, and step into a sanctuary. The room was exactly as he had left it. A half-finished crossword puzzle lay on his desk next to a cold pipe. A stack of history books on the American Civil War sat on his reading chair, a worn bookmark peeking out from a chapter on Gettysburg. The first day, I did nothing but sit in his chair, breathing in the scent of him, and cry. I cried for my father, for the quiet, complicated man I missed so much. And I cried for myself, for the daughter he had apparently seen as a disappointment. My mother would occasionally appear at the doorway. "Are you making any progress, dear?" she'd ask, her voice devoid of any real warmth. "Ethan needs to get his new desk in here soon." She saw only a task to be completed, a room to be emptied. She didn't see me, drowning in memories. I started with the bookshelves, packing away the leather-bound volumes of Gibbon and Macaulay. I ran my hands over the spines, remembering my father reading them aloud to me when I was a child, his voice a low, steady rumble. How could that man, the one who gave me a love of stories, have dismissed my own so cruelly? The question tormented me, a constant, dull ache behind my ribs. I moved to his desk, a massive oak monolith that had dominated the room for as long as I could remember. I sorted through papers, old tax returns, bank statements, receipts. It was tedious, painful work. I emptied the drawers one by one. The top drawers were filled with pens, paper clips, and stationery. The bottom right drawer, however, was locked. I jiggled the handle, but it was firm. I asked my mother if she knew where the key was. "Oh, I have no idea," she said dismissively. "It's probably lost. Ethan says if you can't get it open, he'll just have the whole desk hauled away." The thought of his desk, his private space, being carted off like junk filled me with a sudden, fierce protectiveness. I had to get it open. I spent the rest of the afternoon searching. I looked in every cup, every old coat pocket, every book. Finally, tucked inside a dusty copy of Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman, one of his favorites, I found it a small, ornate brass key. My heart hammered in my chest as I returned to the desk. With a trembling hand, I inserted the key into the lock. It turned with a satisfying click. I pulled the drawer open. It appeared to be empty, except for a thin layer of felt lining the bottom. My shoulders slumped with disappointment. Another dead end. I started to close the drawer, but my fingers brushed against the felt. It felt loose. My curiosity piqued. I lifted a corner. Underneath was not solid wood, but a second, shallower bottom. A false bottom. My breath caught in my throat. I carefully pried it up with my fingernails. And there it was. Lying in the secret compartment was a handsome, dark green wooden box, about the size of a shoebox, with no lock. My hands shook as I lifted it out. It was heavy. I sat down on the floor, my back against the cold legs of the desk, and slowly lifted the lid. The box was filled to the brim with letters. Stacks of them, tied in bundles with simple twine. They were all addressed in my father's neat, familiar cursive. They were all addressed to me. Naomi, the first one read. I picked it up. The postmark was from 15 years ago, during my first year of trying to make it as a writer in the city. I unfolded the crisp paper and began to read. My dearest Naomi, the letter began. I read your story, The Winter Harbor, in the Atlantic Review today. Your mother had thrown the journal in the recycling, but I saw the table of contents and fished it out when she wasn't looking. I read it standing in the garage, like a thief. My girl, what a story. The way you described the frost on the fishing nets, the sadness in the old man's eyes, it was all so true, so beautiful. I felt a surge of pride so immense I thought my chest would crack open. I wanted to call you, to tell you that you have a gift, a rare and precious thing. But then I walked back into the house, and your mother was on the phone with Ethan, crowing about some minor promotion he'd gotten, and the moment passed. The words lodged in my throat. It is my greatest failure as a father, this silence. I am a coward, Naomi. I hide here in my study, and I let the world be shaped by the loudest voices. But please know, even if I never say it, I am so fiercely, incredibly proud of you.
I had to stop reading.
A sob, raw and ragged, tore from my throat. The letter fell into my lap as tears streamed down my face. It was a drink of water after a lifetime of thirst. He hadn't been disappointed. He had been proud.
He had seen me all along.
For the next 2 days, I did nothing but read. I sat on the floor of his study, the world outside fading away, and consumed my father's secret heart. There were dozens of letters, spanning nearly 2 decades. He had written them after every small triumph I'd ever had, and after every crushing disappointment. He wrote one after I'd called him heartbroken, when a publisher rejected my first novel. They are fools, he had written. They don't know what they hold in their hands. Do not stop, Naomi. The world needs your voice. As the letters moved closer to the present, their tone began to shift. His pride in me remained a steady, burning flame, but a new emotion crept in, fear. A deep, gnawing fear of my brother. Ethan was here today. One letter from 2 years ago read. He had me sign more papers for a new investment. He uses words like leverage and capital, but when I look in his eyes, I see nothing but a terrifying emptiness. He is a gambler, but he's not just gambling with my money. I fear he is gambling with our family soul. He is charming, and that is the most dangerous thing about him. He can make poison look like wine. The words sent a chill down my spine. My father had seen it all. He had seen the moral rot I had only sensed. He understood the performance, the charm, the deep, dark void at Ethan's core. He wasn't blind, he was trapped. Trapped by my mother's fierce, unshakable belief in her golden boy and by his own peacemaking nature. These letters were his confession, his rebellion, the only way he knew how to speak the truth. Finally, I came to the last letter. It was at the very bottom of the box. It wasn't in an envelope like the others. It was a single, thick sheet of legal paper, folded twice. The date at the top was from only 3 months before he died. The handwriting was shakier than the others, but just as determined. My dearest Naomi, it started. If you are reading this, it means I have failed. It means I died a coward and did not find the strength to say these things to your face, and for that, I am eternally sorry. You have been the quiet, steady light of my life. Your integrity, your talent, your heart, they are the things I am most proud of. I have lived in fear of what your brother will do when I am gone. He is consumed by a greed that frightens me. He sees my life's work not as a legacy, but as a pile of cash to be burned. He has been moving assets, creating shell companies. I don't understand it all, but I understand the intent. He means to take everything. My hands were trembling so hard I could barely hold the paper. I cannot, in good conscience, leave my legacy in his hands. He would tarnish it. Therefore, I am writing this as a final and binding codicil to my last will and testament. I have been a fool, but I will not be one in death. First, I leave to you and you alone the exclusive rights to all my personal journals, notes, and memoirs. They are a mess, but they are my life's real work. I trust you to make a story of them. Second, and more concretely, I hereby amend my will to leave you a 60% controlling interest in my complete asset portfolio. Your brother will receive the remaining 40%. It is more than he deserves, but I do it in the hopes that he will not be left with nothing, for he has nothing inside him. Let this not be a burden but a tool for your security, and a tool to build a life where your wonderful, sensitive voice can be heard by the entire world. My eyes scanned down to the bottom of the page. There was my father's shaky signature, and below it, 2 other signatures under the heading witnessed by. The first was a name I didn't recognize. The second made my heart stop. Mr. Gerald Albright, my father's lawyer for over 30 years. I stared at the signature, my mind reeling. A codicil, a legal document, witnessed by his lawyer. This wasn't just a letter, it was a weapon. It was the truth, legally notarized. I scrambled for my phone, my fingers fumbling as I looked up the number for Mr. Albright's office. An assistant answered. Mr. Albright's office, how may I help you? My name is Naomi Vance, I said, my voice unsteady. I need to speak with him. It's about my father, Arthur Vance. I was put on hold for what felt like an eternity. Finally, a familiar, gravelly voice came on the line. Naomi? This is Gerald Albright. I was wondering when you might call. Mr. Albright, I breathed, relief and disbelief warring inside me. I found a letter, a codicil. He said, and I could hear a faint smile in his voice. The green box. He told me where he'd hidden it. He was so worried Ethan would find it and destroy it. Is it intact? Yes, I said. It's all here. Good, he said, his tone turning serious. Naomi, your father was a good man, but a deeply conflicted one. He loved you both, but he knew Ethan was ethically compromised. This codicil is perfectly legal and binding. I witnessed it myself, along with my paralegal. It supersedes any previous version of the will your brother may be in possession of. Your father's final wish was for you to be the custodian of his legacy, both financial and personal. He trusted you. I sank back against the wall, the phone pressed hard against my ear. The truth. It was real. It was ironclad, and I was holding it in my hands. Mr. Albright gave me some simple instructions. Do nothing for now. Let your brother continue under his own delusions. The memorial service is on Saturday. Let him have his moment. Your moment will come, and it will be final. We hung up, and I sat there in the quiet, dusty study, surrounded by the ghosts of my father's words. I looked at the letter in my hand, the codicil. He hadn't just given me an inheritance. He had given me a voice. And on Saturday, for the first time in my life, my entire family was going to hear it. The day of the memorial service was gray and cold, a perfect mirror of the mood that had settled deep in my bones. The community hall was packed. It seemed the whole town had come to pay their respects to Arthur Vance, the quiet accountant, the man everyone thought they knew. I saw faces from every chapter of my life, old teachers, neighbors, distant cousins. They all offered me the same gentle, pitying smiles, the same consoling pats on the arm. In their eyes, I was the bereaved, fragile daughter, overshadowed, as always, by my strong, capable brother who was holding court near the entrance, accepting condolences with a grave and dignified expression. He was a masterful actor. He wore his grief like one of his expensive suits, tailored to elicit the perfect amount of sympathy. My mother clung to his arm, her face pale and drawn, looking at him as if he were the only thing holding her upright. I found a seat in the third row, clutching my purse. Inside, folded neatly, was the codicil. It felt as heavy and as powerful as a stone tablet. I wasn't nervous. The fear I had lived with my whole life, the fear of not being enough, of being misunderstood, was gone. In its place was a strange, cold calm. I was no longer a participant in their story. I was an observer, waiting for the final chapter to be read. After a few platitudes from a local minister, it was time for the eulogies. Ethan, of course, went first. He walked to the lectern with a confident, somber stride. He unfolded a piece of paper, but he barely looked at it, his performance perfectly rehearsed. "My father, Arthur Vance, was more than just a father to me," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "He was my mentor, my hero, my best friend." A wave of sympathetic murmurs washed over the hall. I felt a bitter taste rise in my throat. He taught me everything I know about business, about integrity. I remember as a boy, he'd take me on fishing trips. We'd sit in a boat for hours, not saying much, but it was in those silences that he taught me the value of patience, of waiting for the right moment to act.
It was a beautiful lie.
My father hated fishing. He'd gone once with an uncle and complained for a week about the smell and the boredom. As he got older, Ethan continued, his voice cracking artfully. He leaned on me more and more. We spent his final years going over his portfolio, his life's work. He trusted me to carry on his legacy. He saw in me a strength that, he worried, was missing in others. He glanced briefly, sorrowfully, in my direction. The meaning was clear to everyone in the room. He worried about my sister, Naomi. He loved her, of course, but he knew she lived in a world of books and feelings, not a world of action and consequence. "Take care of her, Ethan," he told me in one of our last conversations. "She won't understand this world. You have to be the rock." And I promised him I would. The hall was completely silent, captivated by his moving tribute. He was painting a masterpiece of deception, and our entire community was his canvas. He portrayed himself as the dutiful, burdened son, and me as the beloved but flighty burden. He was cementing the family narrative in stone. He finished his speech with a tear rolling down his cheek, returning to his seat to a chorus of sniffles and my mother's grateful embrace. He had done it. He had solidified his version of the truth. Then, the minister looked at his notes and said, "And now, a few words from his daughter, Naomi." A ripple of anticipation went through the crowd. What could the sensitive, fragile writer possibly say to follow such a powerful eulogy? I felt hundreds of pairs of eyes on me as I walked to the lectern. My legs felt steady. My hands, as I reached into my purse, were not shaking. I took out the folded, heavy paper. Ethan watched me, a small, smug smile playing on his lips. He thought I was going to read a sad poem. I smoothed the paper out on the lectern. "Hello, everyone," I said, my voice clear and amplified by the microphone. It sounded stronger than I expected. Like my brother, I also spent a lot of time thinking about my father's final wishes. I thought about what to say today, what stories to tell. But in the end, I realized I didn't have to. My father already wrote his own eulogy. He wrote down his truest feelings. He wrote them to me. I saw a flicker of confusion in Ethan's eyes. My mother shifted uncomfortably in her seat. I lifted the letter. This is a letter he wrote 3 months before he passed. It is also, as he states, a legal codicil to his will. He asked that his truth be known. I think this is the right time and place for that. A gasp went through the room. I saw Mr. Albright, sitting in the back, give me a single, slow, almost imperceptible nod. That was all I needed. I took a deep breath and began to read. "My dearest Naomi," I read, my voice ringing through the silent hall. "If you are reading this, it means I have failed. It means I died a coward and did not find the strength to say these things to your face, and for that, I am eternally sorry." I paused, letting the words sink in. The air in the room had changed. It was electric. "You have been the quiet, steady light of my life. Your integrity, your talent, your heart, they are the things I am most proud of." I looked up and met my mother's gaze. Her face was a canvas of disbelief. "I have lived in fear of what your brother will do when I am gone. He is consumed by a greed that frightens me. He sees my life's work not as a legacy, but as a pile of cash to be burned. He has been moving assets, creating shell companies. He is charming, and that is the most dangerous thing about him. He can make poison look like wine." The whispers started then, a low hiss spreading through the crowd. All eyes were now on Ethan. His face had gone from smug confusion to a mask of white-hot rage. His knuckles were white where he gripped the armrest of his chair. I continued reading, my voice never wavering. "I cannot, in good conscience, leave my legacy in his hands. Therefore, I am writing this as a final and binding codicil to my last will and testament." I read the next part slowly, deliberately. "First, I leave to you, Naomi, and you alone, the exclusive rights to all my personal journals, notes, and memoirs. I trust you to make a story of them. And then, the final blow. Second, I hereby amend my will to leave you a 60% controlling interest in my complete asset portfolio. Your brother will receive the remaining 40%. It is more than he deserves." A collective, audible gasp filled the hall. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the room. I finished the last lines about hoping it would be a tool for my security and a way for my voice to be heard. Then I read the final, damning part. "Witnessed by Gerald Albright." I looked directly at the back of the room where the lawyer was sitting. He stood up slowly. "That is correct," he said, his voice calm and authoritative, cutting through the stunned silence. "I am Mr. Vance's lawyer. I witnessed that document. It is legal, and it is his final word." The world seemed to collapse for my brother in that instant. The color drained from his face, replaced by a blotchy, purple rage. His carefully constructed reality, his entire public persona, had been dismantled in front of the whole town. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a hatred so pure it was terrifying. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of him. I looked at my mother. She was staring at me, her mouth agape, her eyes wide with a horrified understanding. The story she had told herself for 40 years had just been proven a lie. I folded the letter, placed it back in my purse, and walked back to my seat, not to the one next to my family, but to an empty one on the aisle. The eulogy was over. The truth was out. The reception afterwards was chaos. The somber, respectful atmosphere of the memorial had evaporated, replaced by a frenzied buzz of gossip and speculation. People didn't know where to look. They avoided Ethan as if he were radioactive. He stood by my mother, his face a thunderous mask, while she looked utterly lost, a ship without an anchor. The narrative she had clung to for her entire adult life had been obliterated. The hero she had manufactured was a fraud, and the daughter she had dismissed was the one her husband had truly trusted. A few people, old family friends and neighbors, approached me hesitantly. An aunt, my father's sister, Margaret, pulled me aside, her eyes filled with a mixture of shock and dawning clarity. "Naomi," she whispered, gripping my arm. I don't know what to say. We followed your mother's lead. We listened to the loudest voice. But I always wondered. Your father was so proud of your articles. He used to mail me clippings, you know? He'd never say much. Just look what Naomi wrote. I should have known. Her words were a small balm on a very old wound. It wasn't just my father, then. There were glimmers of truth I had never been allowed to see. My friend Clara found me and wrapped me in a fierce hug. "I have never been more proud of you in my entire life," she said into my ear. That wasn't a eulogy. That was an exorcism. The inevitable confrontation came near the catering table. Ethan, his composure finally shattering, stormed over to me. My mother trailed in his wake, looking terrified. You he hissed, his voice low and venomous, his face just inches from mine. You think you can get away with this?
You forged that.
You pathetic wannabe writer. You cooked up some fantasy and think it's going to stand. His words were meant to cut, to shrink me back down to the person I used to be. But they had lost their power. It's not a fantasy, Ethan, I said, my voice quiet but firm. It's Dad's final word. It's a lie, he roared, and several people nearby flinched. You humiliated me. You humiliated our family. My mother finally found her voice, a weak, pleading sound. Naomi, please. This is not the place. Your brother, he's just upset. You must have misunderstood the letter. There is no misunderstanding, Eleanor, a calm voice said from behind me. Mr. Albright had appeared, a plate of untouched sandwiches in his hand. He looked at Ethan with an expression of profound disappointment. Ethan, I can assure you, as I witnessed it with my own two eyes, that codicil is the absolute and final legal directive of your father. He was of sound mind and clear intent. He wrote it because he was deeply concerned about your business practices and the stability of the estate under your sole control. If you wish to contest it, you are welcome to try. But it will be a very public, very expensive, and very fruitless endeavor. I would advise you to accept your father's wishes with what little grace you have left. Ethan stared at the lawyer, his jaw working silently. He had no more cards to play. The charm, the lies, the bluster, it was all useless against the calm, unassailable fact of the law. He looked from Mr. Albright to me, his eyes burning with a lifetime of resentment. For a moment, I thought he might do something violent, but then something inside him seemed to crumble. The rage drained away, leaving behind a hollow, defeated man. He turned without another word and stalked out of the hall, my mother scurrying after him, calling his name. I stood there, watching them go, and felt not triumph, but a vast, empty sadness. I hadn't won anything. I had just reclaimed what was rightfully mine. I didn't stay for the rest of the reception. There was nothing left to say. Clara took my arm, and we walked out into the cold, clean air. I took a deep breath, and for the first time since my father had passed, it didn't feel like I was suffocating. A year can change everything. I didn't sell my father's house. I moved into it. I turned his study, the room where I had found the truth, into my own writing sanctuary. The big oak desk was still there, but now was covered in my notebooks, my laptop, and stacks of my father's journals. The project of editing his memoirs became my life's work for that year. It was a difficult and beautiful process. His journals were a revelation, a portrait of a man I had only known in glimpses. He was witty, profound, and deeply observant. And on every other page, there was a mention of me. A note about a poem I'd written in high school, a reflection on a conversation we'd had, a worry about my struggles, a burst of pride over my successes. It was the ultimate validation, a conversation with my father that continued long after he was gone. Using a portion of the funds from the estate, I established the Arthur Vance Grant for Emerging Writers, a program to support authors over 40 who were still fighting to have their voices heard. At the first award ceremony, as I stood on a small stage and spoke about my father's love for quiet stories and unsung voices, I felt his presence so strongly it was as if he were standing right next to me. My relationship with my family was irrevocably broken, and yet, in a way, it was more honest than it had ever been. My mother called me a few times, her conversations stilted and full of unspoken things. She never apologized. She couldn't bring herself to admit that her entire life's narrative had been wrong. She would talk about the weather, about a neighbor, about anything but the truth. She was trapped in the rubble of the world she had helped create, and I realized, with a deep and abiding sorrow, that I couldn't rescue her. Ethan I heard from only once. He sent a long, rambling email 6 months after the memorial. It was a masterwork of self-pity, detailing his financial struggles, his unfair treatment by the business community, and his supposed emotional turmoil. Buried in the 5th paragraph was a clumsy, half-hearted apology that was really just a prelude to the final paragraph, where he asked if I could see it in my heart to loan him a substantial sum of money to get a new venture off the ground. He had learned nothing. His apology was just another form of manipulation, another angle to play. I wrote back a short, simple reply. Ethan, I cannot give you any money. The best I can do is wish you well and hope that you find a way to build a life based on something real. I wish you peace. Naomi. I set a boundary, clean and clear, and I felt no guilt. I felt only peace. Looking back now, I see that the greatest inheritance my father left me wasn't the money or the house. It was the truth. For so long, I had defined myself by the reflections I saw in my family's eyes, the disappointment, the dismissal, the invisibility. I thought their version of me was the real one, but the letters and the truth they contained gave me back to myself. I learned that my worth was not something that could be granted or taken away by others. It was inherent. It had been there all along, waiting quietly in the wings for me to finally see it. My father's fear, his silence, had been a burden to him, but in a strange and painful way, his final act of courage set me free. He gave me the key not just to a locked drawer, but to my own life. And I finally understood that being overly sensitive was never a weakness. It was the source of my strength. It's what makes me a writer. It's what allows me to see the truth, to feel it, and finally, to have the courage to write it down. Thank you all for listening to my story today. It's not easy to revisit these moments, but I believe in the power of sharing our truths. It's how we find community and how we heal. Have you ever had a moment where the truth was revealed in a dramatic way, changing everything you thought you knew about your family or yourself? I would be honored if you shared your own experiences in the comments below. Your stories matter. Don't forget to like this video if my journey resonated with you, and please subscribe to the channel for more stories about finding your voice and reclaiming your narrative. Remember, family isn't just about the blood you share. It's about the people who see you, who hear you, and who love you for exactly who you are, not who they want you to be. Thank you for being a part of my chosen family here. I wish you all strength and clarity on your own journeys.